I know that we see China in the news a lot every single day, but the problem is when we see China in the news, let's see, what's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think China in the news? Because I do read a lot of in-depth stuff, so I'm trying to come up with like what's in mainstream media. Organ stealing, that's a thing. Xinjiang concentration camps where the Uyghur Muslim population is going. Surveillance state, facial recognition stuff. Spying on our cell phones and our routers with Huawei stuff. I could go on, but the idea is we're not really getting a balanced view of China. And that's what I liked most about your book in Young China is that stuff's not ignored, but it's also not the point of the book.
Well, that stuff's really important, and I don't want to undervalue that, but that's also not everything. And if you just look at those headlines, the version you get of China is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it's like North Korea 2.0.
I mean, it's North Korea plus. You know, it's
plus,
not
plus.
There's nothing that people would think, and people do think I'm absolutely insane to not only spend time in China but actually really like it.
Really?
And it's sort of like if you were to look at the United States and only look at our headlines from afar, it looks like a dumpster fire.
Right. Which, to be fair, like some of our institutions are. However, I also can walk down the street and
well, here's the difference: is you go home. Is at the end of every day, you know, you read those dumpster fire headlines, and you go home. You get off Twitter, hopefully, and you hang out with your family, and you see that not everything is burning, that not everything is as bad as it's described, or it is, but also simultaneously, you have this really normal, wonderful life, or wonderful in turn, but normal. And what we're missing when we look at China, and this isn't exclusive to China, but it's emphasized with China just because of the volume of China news we get, we're missing the really normal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at China, we look at two versions of China. First is government, which is big and scary.
Yeah.
The second is economy, which is big and exciting and increasingly adversarial and scary. We very rarely look at the people. And then when we do, similar to what you described, you see sort of the extremes. You know, you have like the organ stealing prostitutes, you have dog meat eating festivals, you have the super rich kids in Ferraris or super poor who are being neglected in parts of Western China. And all of those are true, but they also neglect the ordinary. And what I try to focus on in my book is the ordinary, the average, focusing on just what's the makeup of the everyday life throughout different regions of China, and particularly focusing, as the title would suggest, on this young generation who is worlds away, literally worlds away from the older generations in China.
Yeah, the idea that for example, my parents lived a completely different life than me, of course, you know, with internet, education, world travel, that's different. But then when you look at the way, illustrate for us the difference between the generations in China. Because you think your parents are different. Imagine your parents growing up in like the equivalent of Africa, and now you live in New York City.
Well, everyone and their mothers wants to know about millennials, right? This is the thing that anyone who works in a marketing organization, anyone who has something to sell, is so sick of hearing about American millennials. By the way, there's 80 million of us. There are 417 million millennials in China. So just think about the scale, think about the potential for impact. And this is sort of why this
So there's
matters.
more millennials in China than there are people in the United States.
And Canada.
Although Canada, you're not adding a whole lot of numbers.
It's not a lot, but it's another name.
It does sound better.
It sounds a little better. There's actually more young people in China than there are in North America, Europe, and the Middle East combined.
Oh, wow.
So the scale here is pretty incredible.
By the way, when I say Africa, I mean like rural sub-Saharan Africa. I am aware that there are cities and people have mobile phones and cars in Africa.
There's some places that are, I mean, I just came back from Egypt, and Egypt is actually another great example of a place that is only in the news when bad things are happening. But getting to this idea of generational gaps. In the United States, we go on and on about, millennials are so different than Gen Xers, and don't even talk about boomers, worlds apart.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put that into context for a second. In 1969, my dad was deciding whether or not to go to Woodstock. You know about Woodstock?
I've heard about it.
Not yet. We're in Berkeley right now, so you get the general vibe. A lot of those people who left ended up here.
Yeah.
Woodstock was best known for three things: sex, drugs, rock and roll. My dad was interested in a couple of those.
Right.
I'll leave that to the listener. But there's a lot you can know about my dad based on sort of the anthropological wrapping of just that one decision.
Mm-hmm.
He probably had discretionary time, right? He had a little free time on his hands. He certainly had disposable income. He could buy a ticket. He probably had a friend with a car. He was rebelling against something, the war, or someone, his parents. You can imagine him sort of long hair, hippie guy, probably smoked some weed. Like you get the general gist.
That's the drugs part.
In 1969, China was in the middle of the Cultural Revolution. Deep poverty.
Yeah.
I have friends whose parents and grandparents described to me having to eat tree bark to survive.
Oh, that sounds like North Korea, like famine level, picking flowers and eating the seeds.
Deep famine. Between
Yeah.
57 and 61, China's great leap forward, around 40 million people died of starvation.
That's crazy.
And so, by the way, we think of
Good
this as
Lord.
ancient history, but these are China's boomers.
Right.
So the rest of the world, and there's ways to quantify this, and I think you have a smart crowd, so we should talk numbers in a second.
Yeah.
But we have generation gaps, and we obsess over them. China has generation gulfs.
Yeah.
And the problem is a lot of the stereotypes, a lot of the preconceptions we have about China are based on old China. And
old China.
Old China,
Yeah.
so the last generation's China, and even the leadership in charge of China today in the government space or state-owned enterprises. But when you look at this young generation, not just the years separating them, but the quality of change. The rest of the world evolves at a certain pace, and then there's China speed.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's sort of fun to quantify. So maybe we could do that.
Yeah, I would love to, because I think people go, "Oh, China's developing so fast," and people think like, "Oh, they got fiber and high-speed rail before us," and it's like, well, yes, and also they didn't even have, running water in most of the country until whatever, like while we were already watching cable TV.
If I were to say the one thing that makes this one generation in China unique from their international cohort, so from millennials around the world, it's the pace of change. When we say China speed, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, Shaq is tall, China moves fast.
Right,
We
yeah.
get the general idea. But let me quantify that. So I'm born in 1990. I'm born in Berkeley, actually, Alta Bates Hospital, about 10 minutes away from here. And in my lifetime, I've watched our per capita GDP, so the basic unit for what a life gets you. It's not perfect, but it's good when you're comparing internationally. I've watched our per capita GDP increase 2.5 times in my lifetime. So the education my parents could afford for me, maybe 2.5 times better. The cars that my neighbor could drive, maybe 2.5 times faster. The length of the vacations we could take, 2.5 times longer. You get the general gist. It's, again, not perfect, but it's a
Right.
general metric. My friends born in 1990 in China have watched their per capita GDP increase 27 times in their lifetime.
That's crazy.
But
So far. Yeah.
developing country, maybe, big economy, pretty easy, right? Well, what about India? In 1993, India's per capita GDP and China's was pretty much the same, around $400. In the space between 1990 and today, so again, this millennial lifetime, India has watched its per capita GDP increase 5 times. Brazil, a BRICS nation, 3.2. Germany, a robust economy, 1.9. In fact, when you look at the top 60 performing economies today, every other country has watched their per capita GDP, the amount of change, the amount of growth that millennials have witnessed in their lifetime, that number is under 10. It's single digits.
Sure.
Only China is 27. Only China's even in the double digits. And so, we think about that as a macro number, but think about it in terms of watching your parents' life change. Think about moving out of poverty, realizing that, okay, not all TVs are black and white, realizing that, okay, now it's normal to move from a bike, which used to be a luxury. The flying pigeon used to be the status of class and clout in China. And suddenly you've watched your streets filled with cars and then multiple cars and multi-car garages. You've watched your entire city change from a village to a town to a city in your lifetime.
Right. It's. I've seen when I was in high school, we had a teacher who went to China, which was amazing. I mean, that was nuts. It was like the early '90s or something like that when he went, and he said that there were buildings, and if someone had a TV, they would put it outdoors, and everyone would go outside and watch it. And now it's like, no, now you got cord cutters in China who are watching everything on their phone.
Exactly. Exactly. It's difficult to describe to us because our ecosystem has changed at a certain pace. There's this great David Foster Wallace speech, commencement speech, I believe Kenyan, in which he tells the story of a couple of fish. There's an old fish and then there's 2 young fish. They're swimming in the water, as fish do. And the older fish is swimming past and he says, hey, gentlemen, the water's fine today, isn't it? And the 2 fish are like, okay, dude, and swim past and swimming. And then one fish says to the other fish, wait a second, what's water?
Yeah.
We get used to the ecosystem that we're surrounded in. In China, and this is one of the most fascinating things happening right now, this young generation just thinks that that's the pace the world moves.
Right.
They just think that's water because that's all they've known for most of them. There's only 9% of the Chinese population that has a passport. 2/3 of those are millennials, by the way. So this young generation is far more exposed than any other generation in Chinese history. With that being said, this young generation in China is just learning that their water is actually unique, that not everywhere in the world changes at that pace.
Huh.
And what they've built and what they've witnessed, what they've watched their uncles, parents, grandparents enjoying in their lifetime is actually internationally unique.
Do you think that makes them better equipped to deal with change since it's going so quickly? Because, like, if me growing up in a medium-sized city and moving to a big city, I had to adapt really fast to go, oh, people do things differently here. So I know that that's changed me and changed my business. I would imagine if the whole country's like that, and then you look at the speed of business, say in the United States, and you go, oh, they're really slow. You're thinking faster. You're moving faster. You don't have 6 months to do a committee approval process. You have to make a decision by tomorrow.
There is no question. So there's a saying from Deng Xiaoping, the sort of architect of China's modern economy. So China, reform and opening around 1980, moved from communist China to sort of capitalist, pragmatist,
Guy goes
socialist. Right, exactly. Yeah. There we go.
That's one of my vocab words. I was like, why do I need this?
There just for now.
Right now.
This was it.
Yeah.
And so Deng is known for a saying. It's 摸着石头过河. It means crossing the river by feeling the stones. This was the guiding principle of China's economy in the 1990s, early 2000s. And what it means, it's a beautiful way of saying, we don't really know what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we have a direction. We're on one bank, and that's poverty. We're looking across this river of time to the other bank, which is prosperity. But we don't see a path. So we are entering the river. We are leaning on a certain economic principle or an idea. We're shifting our weight, seeing if it's steady. And then crossing the river that way, we're expecting to slip. We're expecting to fall. We're expecting to have to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
And so to keep with this water idea, the rest of us kind of live in a lake. But China, because of its pace of change, it's a rushing river. If you do not adapt with it, you will get washed downstream.
How did you originally get interested in China? I mean, aren't you like I thought maybe you were just like a Jewish kid from Long Island, but instead you're a Jewish kid from Berkeley.
I was big difference, but enough time.
But not that, but in a way also not.
Yeah, it's pretty much. Yeah, there's like a loop between California and Long Island that's actually just an inch apart. I 18 years in California. I went to public school here, not so far from here, and ended up going to Columbia, which was a massive culture shock for me. Mm-hmm. Going to New York and meeting all these prep school kids and East Coasters who, with collared shirts, it was revolutionary.
Yeah.
My first interest in China, so I actually took Chinese one semester freshman year. My dad made me. And to this day, when I give people tours around Columbia, which I every now and then do when friends come and visit, I'm in New York, I will point to the third story window. And this is not a pleasant joke at any point, really. But I would say, I would look at that window and think about exiting from there every day of the class.
Because it was so
miserable.
Hard. Yeah.
Miserable. And I didn't see the point. But because of that, and I skipped for 2 months, by the way, and on the final, I crammed and I dialed down the center for the last 5, which I've never done. It remains the worst grade I've ever gotten in my life. But thank you, grade inflation, I was able to pass.
Right.
And because of that one test, when I was making the decision where to study abroad, I had a choice. So I'm a big science fiction fan. The answer to your question is science fiction first got me there. Mm-hmm. I was looking at these study abroad pamphlets, and one of them was French. I apparently spoke French at the time.
Yeah, sure.
Not a word, but spoke it. And it kind of looked like a history pamphlet. Go learn about the history of Western thought, Western philosophy, Western governance, what have you, Western art, drink some wine. You had there's a vision of it. Looked like the past. And then I looked at the University of Hong Kong. Which, because of that one semester, was a linguistic loophole. I could go. Columbia has a rule.
Because you quote unquote qualified for
Columbia has a rule that you have to be fluent where you go, in the language where you're speaking. Because Hong Kong is sort of half and half, and University of Hong Kong is taught in English. It was a loophole. They only allowed for 2 people to go. I was a lit major. I had done very little to do with China and Hong Kong, and I was studying business and psych as minors, but
psych and lit, man, you didn't want a job.
I did not. I will say,
and
this is the funny part of today, is I've managed to use all of it.
Yeah.
The odds were stacked against me.
Had to start your own business.
I mean, it's totally true. And because the pamphlet for Hong Kong, it looked like the cover of Blade Runner to me, or Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Like, it looked like the future. And when you set it up like that, okay, I could either go to the past and drink wine, which of course sounds good on some days, or you could go see where everyone is describing the future is going to happen.
Yeah, that's cool.
Easy decision. I went, loved it, and traveled pretty extensively throughout mainland China myself. alone a lot of it because I was the only study abroad kid with a multi-entry visa. And this is where it got interesting. I realized very quickly that the China that was being described to me in the news, in the media, and then even reverberating off of people who had spent the week in Shanghai, business people, or they had done a tour of the wall, and then come back and they are China experts. As you spend a week in China, you're a China expert. That's how it goes.
Yeah, they can use chopsticks, sort of.
Right.
As long as they got the little rubber band on the top.
Exactly. Can mangle a few words. And I don't mean to, everyone should get I'm a huge believer in travel, but
yeah, of course. It just doesn't make you an expert because you went to go see the Berlin Wall, for example.
The China that they were describing to me was very different than the China I was experiencing, even on a cursory level.
Mm-hmm.
And a big part of that was, again, the difference between headline China, which is terrifying.
Was that exciting though? Because I feel like if someone told 24, 5-year-old me, hey, on the other side of there are organ stealing prostitutes and chaos, I would be like, great. When does the next train leave?
So that's actually exactly what happened.
Okay.
I have a godfather in the Bay Area. And he sort of did some business with a gentleman in Hong Kong named Henry, and I think I gave him a pseudonym in the book. And forgive me for forgetting.
Oops.
Sorry, Henry.
Sorry, Henry.
Fully
outed. Been outed.
And I went to the University of Hong Kong. I spent like 2 weeks there, and you realize pretty quickly that Hong Kong's sort of a middle zone. Until 1997,
Mm-hmm.
Hong Kong was a British colony, so a lot of the people who I was interacting with had grown up in sort of this Western, a sort of East-West mix of a culture, and it wasn't out there enough for me. So I wrote my godfather a note being like, hey, I'm going to Shenzhen, which is right across the border. And he wrote me a note back almost immediately. And the note cautioned against 3 things. First, beware of pickpockets. Second, beware of buying fake goods because they will complicate your return back across the border. And third, beware of prostitutes, because not only will they try to kill you, they'll also steal your organs along the way.
Well, what do you care if you're already dead?
Sincerely, Henry. It was like this beautiful, loving note. By the way, this is a person who's written me a note and said, Zach, I'm so happy to have you as a godson. I can't wait for you to meet my grandson. Like an overwhelmingly protective and loving person.
Right.
So when he's the sort of person who's like, hey, by the way, other side of the border, organ stealing prostitutes.
Right.
Naturally, I was on the next train over.
Yeah, I mean it's like, were you never a 25?
Right.
Uncle Henry, keep selling it.
I was 20 at the time, so it was even like,
you're even
screw
more
you, Mom.
invincible.
Like, see, check this out. And I went, and this is the hard part, and this is why I think a lot about sort of what the media is telling us, because those things matter. I went and I got off the train on the Shenzhen side of the border, the mainland China side of the border. For those of you who haven't gone between Hong Kong and mainland China, you actually do need. For mainlanders and for Hong Kong residents, you don't need a visa per se, but you need a form that allows you to go. It's a border crossing. Yeah, it's a formal border crossing. And I get off, and suddenly no one speaks English.
Yeah.
You don't realize that everyone in Hong Kong speaks English until no one in China speaks English.
Right.
And by the way, there's about 1 million people. I mean, it's this teeming mass, this roiling mass. And at the time, mainland China had sort of bad dairy, and so people were bringing bottles of milk from Kowloon.
Bad
dairy. There's a question about the quality of the dairy that young people were consuming in China. And so people would take Hong Kong milk. You're only allowed to bring 2 cartons. So you would take, and I brought my 2 cartons. You would take your 2 cartons, and then people would flood you as soon as you crossed the border, because there were milk dealers who were buying the milk, the safe milk, and then redistributing throughout Shenzhen. And so there's this team of people, this massive group of people who sort of storm me because I have my milk, and they like say some stuff, and I have no idea what they're saying. I'm trying to find my hostel, and I realized that the hostel I booked, like, I can't even call them because my phone number, which worked in Hong Kong, didn't work in mainland China. And
oh man!
And the problem is that every single person I'm looking at, I think, is an organ stealing prostitute.
Right? Sure.
Because the only thing I know is that, and you realize that a lot of the way that people approach China were armed with the only things we know, and those increasingly are adversarial. They're sensationalist, and to a certain extent they're true, but in the same way that I wouldn't want someone to judge Americans by the headlines, we can't judge Chinese people, Chinese citizens, by the headlines, even more so, because they don't choose their government.
Right.
I was at the Aspen Institute recently, and it's sort of like a fancy think tanky thing.
It's like a Davos type thing.
Davos, but like in jeans, which is even more, by the way,
jeans.
unsettling because when these people, it's people, you don't know who's a billionaire. And when they're all wearing suits, you can kind of guess. But when everyone's in jeans, everyone looks very uncomfortable. Regardless,
everyone's wearing those Obama dad jeans.
Right, exactly. Like this is how I
blend in.
This is how I human, basically. And and so I was there, and you realize that there's this version of China that we sort of digest. And I got to tell them, I got to tell the group at Aspen Institute, it's like, look, my friends in China didn't choose their government. We did.
Yeah.
You could blame us for our government if you wanted to. Like, I mean, not everyone did. Most people didn't, actually, if you're going by the numbers, at least most recently. But, like, a lot of us did. It definitely says something about America that we have the government that we do. In China, they don't get a vote. And so we have this idea of the Chinese people that we have not cleaved from the Chinese government, which is fair if you're assessing Americans. It's not fair to impose that same system of judgment on China because they don't have a say.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I didn't really even think about the fact that they don't vote about. Well, do they have some kind of pseudo?
There's an internal democratic process, so they say. There's actually multiple parties within the Chinese government. They're deeply outnumbered by the Chinese Communist Party, and the voting has increasingly, especially as Xi Jinping has become a stronger force. And not, we have the habit of being like, all right, there's one guy, he's the hero, and sort of heaping credit and blame on one person.
Yeah. Sort
of like the hero lens of looking at things, very Western. And Xi Jinping has a team around him. He's not a sole actor. It's not like this renegade. There's a larger concept that's pushing Xi over there. And the voting internally has gotten definitely very one-sided.
Yeah.
Always kind of has been.
He's a president for life, isn't he?
He could be. And this is actually a great example of news gone a little bit wrong. So what happened was Xi Jinping, China basically had a vote to do away with term limits. And term limits meaning that Xi Jinping or the
get reelected indefinitely.
Indefinitely.
Yeah.
But he has to get reelected indefinitely. So the news the next day was president for life. And pretty much the only thing that people know about this was not that there was they did away with term limits, but that Xi Jinping is going to be elected he's now president for life.
So they're
he's
just assuming the results of this change, right?
And there's some tactical regions that you could assume that he's not going to be president for life. And if you were to ask people within China, they immediately think of these reasons, which is that, okay, like Belt and Road Initiative or One Belt, One Road is really important. This is an international, massive infrastructure plan that currently involves around 68 countries in the Asia extended region. This is Xi Jinping's baby. It makes sense for him at this fragile moment in Chinese diplomacy as they're moving from a regional to an international and a global actor, for Xi Jinping to continue to steward that an extra 5 years.
Interesting. So, like, excuse me. So what you're saying maybe is, or what I'm hearing anyway, is he wants to say, hey, all these countries where we're building highways and buildings and ports, I'm not going to then leave office in 2 years and then you're stuck with like a half-baked port in a road that doesn't have pavement. I'm going to be around for a while. He's not thinking, ooh, this is going to look pretty bad to all those people that want democratic China. He wants stability and he wants permanence so that people have confidence in his plans.
I'm saying it's possible.
Okay.
And so when we're not doing ourselves any favors, when we just put out to the general public, Xi Jinping, president for life,
right?
That's one of many options. And there is some strategic value at a moment where it looks like every 4 years, the United States, which is largely the biggest foreign actor, the biggest international actor on the world stage, we're a hegemonic power, where it looks like every 4 years we might trade up a deal. Or excuse me, we might tear up a deal.
Right, we've done that.
You look towards the
Everyone
TPP.
Freaks out. Yeah.
The TPP in particular, if you're looking at the Asia region, like we have left a lot of our allies not knowing what kind of trade partner we're going to be. Japan, South Korea, strategic allies. And so at this time where it looks like, ooh, like what's going on in the U.S., China is attempting to, and I'm not saying that this is for sure what's happening, but this is absolutely a strategic consideration. China's attempting to be the adult in the room, being like, hey, you know what? We're not building our relationships in aid that we might withdraw after 4 years or treaties that we might tear up after 4 years. We're building our relationships in steel and concrete, not to last 4 years, but to last generations.
That's such a Chinese outlook, right? Because when I talk to Chinese people, of which you talk to 100 times more, they really look back at literally ancient history, like thousands of years old, and like, oh yeah, this is a thing that we used to do in ancient China. They're talking about it like it's a different country, but it's not really the same thing as like it's not like when we're talking about ancient Rome. They're talking about their own country. So they sort of have this, they seem to have this wider or longer timeline where like 100, 200 years is like not, it's for us, that's the whole history of the United States. We're thinking, what was here before that? Nothing. Native Americans living in wigwams, damn it. Like they're thinking that was not that long ago.
It definitely feels that way to a certain extent. But on the other side of it, what I can say for sure is that they're not incentivized to at least think about it in 2-year terms.
Right.
Or in 3-year terms and then election year. And so there is certainly a longer, there's a lot of, there's actually a lot of discussion about this right now on sort of China Twitter, and I'm not hugely involved there because it scares me. But I do follow it to a certain extent. There's a lot of discussion, is China playing 3-dimensional chess while we're playing checkers? I don't think for sure, but undoubtedly, and again, I have this Aspen Institute on my mind. It happened recently. I watched a lot of American politicians of note, describe how they're realizing the incentive systems of our system, getting reelected, career politicians. It incentivizes you to think about the short term. The incentives in China, short term definitely matters. But they're able to think about the longer term. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I'm talking a lot about the positive sides. There's a rash. There's a bevy of negative aspects of the Chinese government. I'm not trying to say there's not. What I am trying to sort of put forward is that if we only cover China in the most negative way, we are missing a lot of their strategic considerations that are important for us to consider. What is it? 知己知彼，百战不殆. Know thyself, know your enemy, and 100 wars you will not lose. 100 is metaphorical. We're not fighting 100 wars. I'm hoping we're never going to fight a hot war with China. Yeah. But we're not giving ourselves to know the opportunity to know China, who I don't think has to be an enemy, but especially if we're painting them as an adversary. We got to see it from their point of view.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of irrational concerns that Americans and Westerners in general have. I had this guy on the show a couple months ago named Kai-Fu Lee, president of Google China, and he does a lot of investing and AI.
Incredibly well-known, a towering figure in the space.
Oh, really? Okay, good. I figured, but a lot of people.
And it was only after he was on your podcast.
Of course, well, that makes sense. Right. That makes sense. Yeah, we do build careers over.
Right. I thank you, by the way, for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Young China was in stores, sold out completely by the time you're watching this,
right.
But you can try to get one.
Sure.
The idea that I thought I'm going to have Kai-Fu Lee on. We're going to talk about AI and why China has an advantage in this area, and it's going to be interesting. I had a lot of people that were, of course, deeply interested in it, but I also had crazy people or people that to me seemed crazy that were like, I can't believe it. You didn't ask him about how China steals all of our intellectual property. First of all, it's like, I don't harass my guests when they come on the show. I challenge them if necessary, but that to me seemed completely irrelevant. It also sort of chalks up all of China's advantages to, well, they're stealing from us, so ... And it's like, wait a minute, there may be plenty of that, but that is certainly not the reason that they're ahead of the game. And the more we sort of say, well, they're ahead of us because they do this negative stuff or this bad stuff or this illegal stuff, we're really just writing off our own disadvantage in a way where we're sort of outsourcing responsibility. We're throwing our hands in the air and saying, well, at least we don't steal from other people. And it's like, cool, you can have this sort of victim mindset and say that that's why they're ahead, but it's not true. And it's going to disadvantage us to think that way in the long run.
Most people have never considered what it looks like from a seat in China.
Mm-hmm.
What does the issue of IP look like from there? What is the current American reaction on tariffs or activity from between America and China look like from China? There's a saying that got popular on the Chinese. I spend a lot of time on the Chinese internet, for better or worse, and
sure.
and like I'm not on political forums. I'm watching like trash TV.
Mm-hmm.
I spend a lot of time on like the Chinese equivalent of Quora, which is a little bit higher minded. But like hours and hours of really bad TV, and we should talk about language learning later because this is an important part of it.
Definitely.
But there's a saying that got popular. It's 屁股决定脑袋.
But something.
Exactly. It means
But decision.
屁股决定脑袋. It means your butt determines your brain.
Oh, that's funny.
Where you sit in the world, the people around you, the view from your seat in the world, the sort of podcast you're listening to, the chatter you're hearing growing up, that seat in the world that you occupy to a far greater degree than we'd even like to admit, determines our worldview. And so the challenge is, and this is what we often tell our kids when there's like conflict resolution, but the challenge that I see, particularly in America, also in China, is the willingness to take yourself out of that seat that you might not even realize you're in, that you might not even realize that you've like grown barnacles on because you've been there for so long, and put yourself in a seat in China and look at it from that perspective. A lot of what I try to do and with Young China and the work I'm doing with Young China Group and I do a good amount of talking about this stuff and it is not to make people in love with China and certainly not to make people in love with the Chinese government, which is usually what people hear. They're like, this guy is not bashing the Chinese government. He must love the Chinese government, in which case I hate him and I'm not going to listen to anything. And then it's just to consider what the world looks like from a seat in China. Think about, okay, what does it look like when the American president seems to be using China as a bit of a scapegoat? What does it look like when the Chinese government seems to be sort of balking on some of these trade considerations? What does it look like when we consider the other actors in the region? When you take out the United States, China has some of the hottest, most confrontational borders in the entire world. We often forget that. We think, okay, there's the United States and China. Think about having Russia to your north.
Yeah.
Think about in your backyard you have North Korea.
Yeah, no thanks.
No thanks. And then Japan, obviously Taiwan, and Taiwan is in a gray space. India and Pakistan, who both have historical conflicts with China and currently have a conflict with one another
And
to a
have
certain
nuclear
degree.
weapons.
It's a tough place to be. But we don't think about that. We think about United States and China. We think about what are our interests. We would be doing ourselves a massive service. And this isn't exclusive to China. This is almost like preschool level. Like now, have you seen this issue from Chad's point of view?
Right.
But we don't do it. And it's a little bit our media's fault for. And I don't want to like rant against mainstream media because that's like a triggering word for me at this point.
Sure,
I like freak out every time someone says it. But we're click motivated. And so if there's something that's relatively tame that like China, there's something kind of okay going on in China, people aren't going to click it.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be, the incentives aren't there for that story to be rewritten in a different version unless it's like hot war coming with China, trade tariffs blowing off.
Right.
You can even bet on it, by the way. This is a totally valid thesis for an investment fund. If someone out there is like, trying to make it, we're in Silicon Valley, so this is a good place to talk about. Just perception. When Xi Jinping came to the United States for his first visit, he first went to Washington. And I was thinking about at the time, I'm 25 at the time, I don't have a ton of money at all. But I'm like, all right, I got a few pennies in my pocket, I'm going to see what I can do with them. So Xi Jinping's coming to the United States. I know that means that he's going to be in the press more. 95% of the press written about China is negative. The press opinion impacts markets because perceptions impact market. I'm like, all right, when Xi Jinping comes, there's going to be so much negative press about China that any Chinese company is going to be negatively impacted. Their stock price is going to be negatively impacted because we can't cleave the idea of the Chinese government from a Chinese company. So I'm like, all right, Alibaba is going to go to its natural low. It's going to go as low as possible because of all the negative press.
Load up on shares.
Sure enough, it goes down to, I think, like 57, 58. I bought it 60, and now it's tripled in price. And, of course, it's fluctuated since then. But, like, you could bet on how negative pretty much every spin and every description of China is going to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. You really can. And I think that this does us a disservice when we look at that. Because there was a pro tip that I gave a long time ago. What was it? It was... I saw a news report, and it was so wrong. It was about something I knew a lot about, and I can't remember what the topic was at the time, but I remember looking at it, and it was so wrong. And then I looked at another news report about something else a few months later, and it was so wrong, and I went, wait a minute. Since I'm an expert in these two areas, and these news reports are so wrong, and they're obvious to me, it's obvious how wrong they are because I'm an expert, that probably means that everything I see in the news reports is equally wrong. I just don't know enough about that subject to point out how wrong it is. So then I started realizing, oh yeah, pretty much everything you see here is going to be really simplified, is going to be really overstated or understated, or is going to only focus on the negative. So you have to bear that in mind when you're looking at something like news about China. Just like you have to read it like you're looking at news about anything that you're an expert in and go, nope, that's for sure not the case.
That's the rabbit hole here. Because I feel that way about China, and then I'm like, well, what about Iran?
Yeah,
What about
exactly.
what about oil? What about Elon Musk? What about
Yeah.
any of these things that are often in the news? And it is a little bit terrifying. I will say the stakes are higher for China, and the reason is because the people who are representing China to the world are the ones who are most negatively impacted by the censorship regime. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you sort of again have to think about incentives. I get to meet a lot of the people who write about China. I've written about China. I'm not a journalist. And so there's some people who are great. There's some people who are incredible, speak excellent Chinese. There's a lot of people who don't, which to me is always kind of troublesome. But you also have to remember that journalists get into journalism because they believe in free speech. They believe that you have to expose the truth. They believe, and particularly in the United States, we spend a lot of time on the relationship between government and the people, and how do you expose the government in order to free the people. Like that's a big part of the identity of a journalist. And so the Chinese government is essentially taking the people who are in charge of representing them to the outside world, smacking them, tearing apart their values, like directly insulting their values, being like, you can't talk about this one part, and then asking them to, okay, but say something nice about me. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
And it's also just not what we want to hear. So I'm not like, look, everything's not beautiful in China. There's a lot of issues. But we're not doing ourselves a service by not considering a more balanced view, and especially not even just balance, because that again is a sort of a tired trope. But considering what the world looks like from China, because that would better equip us to, okay, how do we strategically approach China as a trade partner, as a trade adversary, as an international partner in relieving, in charity. There's a lot of pretty incredible philanthropy that's beginning to bubble up within China. How do we think about partnerships there? But if you only see China as an adversary, you're limiting yourself.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times when people, you just sort of see people's insecurities come through too. Like this one guy runs like some crappy bike rack company now or something. He's like, yeah, China stole our company's IP. And I'm like, actually, you probably got laid off not because China stole your IP, but because you're a crazy person that nobody liked in the office. And now he's got this permanent sort of black mark against China. But we all have this preconceived notion of, many of us here in the United States have this preconceived notion of like, oh, well, China bad, USA good. And it's not just white people from Michigan.
Right.
I'm in California. There's a huge community of Taiwanese people, for example, and they're kind of like, ooh, mainland China, and it's like, well, yeah, you have conflict with them. So all of these things are colored by this, and you don't have a whole lot of you have a ton of mainland Chinese people here, but they're not going around going, hey, I just want to correct your perception of China. They're freaking working. They're studying. They're not sitting here trying to represent, the nation in this way. I want to switch focus a little bit to the pressure that some Chinese people our age and younger are in, because if you're developing at 10x, 27x, whatever normal speed, your generation gap is such that a lot of the focus is on you as the maybe one or two offspring. Now that they don't have the one child policy anymore, for those of you that don't know, there was a whole lot of time where you were only allowed by the government to have one kid. But now you can have two, but still that's a lot of pressure for, okay, your grandma, grandpa, your mom's grandma, grandpa, and your mom and dad both, and everyone else, all the IEs, uncle, we're all looking at you. So don't screw this up.
The pressure is enormous. And let me tell you a quick story. I moved to China on my own when I was 22. I just graduated college. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I had a backpack, the address of a hostel, and the number of a language program. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have a job set up. I went there, quit the language program pretty quick. You realize that the worst place to learn language in a city is the place where all the other foreigners are.
Oh, good point.
We can get into that. But so one of the jobs I had basically was like working. I taught SAT, I taught ACT, I taught golf at one point, which is funny because I don't know how to play golf. I watched videos on how to do that. I got fired after about 2 weeks when that came out. So kind of scrapping it. One of the jobs I had. Towards the end of that first year, I was in Suzhou, just outside of Shanghai, and the job was at sort of an upscale English tech fun weekend training school. So I was the teacher in a class with 6 5-year-olds, and it was me, one foreigner, and 3 TAs, 2 or 3 TAs depending on the class. And my preconception, so we're all armed with preconceptions. My preconception, I hadn't dealt a lot with little kids before. And I'm like, oh, damn it. These are 小皇帝. These are China's little emperors. The term little emperor first came up in around 1986. I didn't know this at the time, but the idea is basically that like you have these kids, single children, because of the one child policy, which began around 1980, who are just spoiled rotten. They have it's called the 4-2-1 problem. You have 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and 1 child.
Oh, yeah.
So you have all these grandparents, these 2 parents who are putting all their love, attention, money, food, obesity has become an issue. They're all funneling it down to this one kid. And if you have a room full of little emperors, you are very clearly the court jester. I had a turtle puppet in one hand. I'm thinking, great, this is what my college education
Right.
is.
Yeah.
So we start class, and the thing about 5-year-olds is that they're adorable.
Yeah.
There's one kid in particular, Jianguo, which is this really old school name that means like build the country. Who had this like lovable coif. He had like his hair was done to one side. He had these corduroys. He had these light up shoes. The ones that where you every step you take they kind of blink. And he played well with the other kids. They got along well. He was polite. He was curious. And my ill feelings, I'm like, how could I hold this against these 5-year-olds? It would have been a totally normal class, were it not for the fact that at those 6 kids. For those 6 kids, at the back of the class, there was a glass partition. And leaning up against that glass partition were 12 parents and 24 grandparents.
They're watching you teach?
Every single twist of a microscope, every single punch of a keyboard, they were leaning against the glass, breathing onto it, watching their kid.
The whole time?
The whole time.
That is so awkward.
Class finishes.
What?
And I mean, think about it for those kids. Think about the amount of attention. Class finishes. I walk out. I talk to some of the teachers. I'm like, this is a chance to show off my Chinese and also try to, keep my job. And all of a sudden, I hear Jianguo start to cry out of the corner of the room. I look over, and three of his grandparents are sort of like arguing amongst themselves. His dad is looking extraordinarily confused. I knew it was his dad because he was dressed the exact same way, corduroy pants, hairstyle. I'm like, all right, I figured the same person dressed them both. And sure enough, his mother and his grandmother were leaning over Jianguo, wailing, and they were holding a notebook, not unlike this, a notebook with words on them. I walk up and I realize those words on those pages were microscope, keyboard, robot. These are the English words that we had learned that day. I ask, what's going on? I didn't assign any homework.
Yeah.
And his mom looks at me and says, Jianguo will have to take the Gaokao, the college entrance exam, in 13 years. We are trying to give him the edge.
Yikes.
So we think about these little emperors, and this is the consumer story, right? Like everyone's lighting up about, wow, Chinese millennials buying stuff. We love it. Even if you have 10% of them, that's 40 million people. Everyone's just trying to, how do we get so much money? And the reason that they have money to buy things is because of that upside down pyramid that I was describing. 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 1 child. It acts as a funnel for resources, love, etc. It also acts as a funnel for pressure.
Yeah.
For expectations.
Oh, man. I'm getting like anxiety just thinking about not knowing the word microscope, which also I don't know in any of the 5 languages that I speak other than English. And this kid is 5. He's 5 years old.
It's a level of expectation and pressure that we can't imagine. I recently, when my book came out, I got to do the really cool thing, which was go to speak at my high school.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of the teachers that sort of ignored me before, I suddenly was their like favorite student in retrospect.
I always knew you'd go somewhere, Dychtwald.
Which is great. And I got to see some teachers who I really loved. And I honestly, like, if it weren't a quick shout out to teachers do not like, if there's one group of people in the United States who I wish I could double their pay tomorrow, it'd be you. Thank you for everything that you're doing. So important. And I got to talk with these 14 and 15-year-olds who are, by the way, have laptops in class, and which was just blowing my mind. There's one kid literally day trading in high school. There's one kid next to me who is day trading Bitcoin.
Wow.
We can talk about that later.
That's crazy.
But the questions they asked me after I sort of do my talk, and the questions they asked me are about mental health. They're about expectations. They're about pressure. What about homework? What about when things get too hard? And you compare the level of pressure on these young people in China, this generation in China versus millennials in the United States, pretty incomparable. pretty incomparable. And by the way, that level of pressure is starting to produce some cracks. I think of this young generation as being between sort of two tectonic plates. I call them in the title the Restless generation. The reason they're the Restless generation, they're in charge of creating China's modern identity.
Mm-hmm.
So on one tectonic plate, on one side you have tradition, what it's always meant to be Chinese, education focus, a family focus, wife, kids, husband, hurry up and like form a family. Like there's these ideas of that. And that's sort of Chinese tradition. Obviously, it's very messy. There's a lot of different things that go into it for some people and not for others. But there's a relatively codified idea. On the other side, you have the pressures of modernity. Get a great education. Urbanization. It used to be kids, when you were 18, you wouldn't have to get educated. You just start a farm next to your parents. And so getting married at 18 made sense. But now people feel like if they don't have a great college degree, a great higher, master's, PhD, then they're not fit for the job market. The pressures of modernity, the price of things in a city, these two tectonic plates are grinding against one another. And this young generation, the post-90s generation really, so born out 1990 and after, they're at the fault line, getting ground down, but also deciding where those two tectonic plates are going to fit together. They get to decide what it means to be Chinese in the modern world today.
Yeah. And so no pressure.
No
right?
pressure. Yeah,
no
just
pressure.
figure it out.
Figure out your national identity.
Figure it out.
Please your parents, please your grandparents, and, remember, live life for yourself.
And have some fun.
And have some fun.
This is the hard part, right? So the older generation was best known. If you think of all right, what are some hallmark high-level differences? The older generation was best known for their ability to 吃苦, to eat bitter, to do difficult things, to suffer, to do difficult things for long periods of time at the prospect of delayed gratification. You might think of grit. And by the way, delayed gratification back then, this is like Cultural Revolution. You're talking about, working long hours in the field, not so that you're going to have a better life that month. This isn't, Tommy's going to work hard this month. If he gets a good grade, we're going to take him to Disney World. Not how it works. We're talking about working hard for 5 years, 10 years, delaying gratification for a generation. This young generation does not want to eat bitter. And frankly, they don't have to. When you think about why the older generation was working hard, it's so that this younger generation can have a better life. They want to 活在当下, to live in the moment. There's a toast in I lived in Chengdu for 3 years. It's my favorite place in China. I don't live there now, and it kind of crushes me daily. And that is, we're eating, so imagine it's me and a bunch of friends, we're eating 烤鱼, which is barbecued fish. It's this amazing Chongqing dish. So you have like sort of crispy skinned fish, river fish most likely, because Chengdu and Chongqing are on the middle of the country. It's super spicy. It's sort of steeped in this oil.
Oh, is that the numbing hot, Chongqing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Chongqing, you have a lot of like, it's just normal spices. And then Chengdu brings it's called huajiao. It's a type of numbing spice. It's Sichuan peppercorn.
Yeah.
So it's like explosions in your mouth. It's the best.
I think it's weird. That's some stuff like there's some white people shit that we eat here in the States, obviously. When I came here, that was when I was like, wait a minute, you can eat all these things I've never even heard of before. Like numbing spicy, I didn't know that was a real thing. And it's not just so hot you can't feel your mouth. It's just like there's something going on there.
It's a different flavor entirely.
Yeah.
And so we're sitting there we're drinking some beers and there's a toast. It's 今朝有酒,今朝醉. It means today we have booze, so today we'll drink. We'll enjoy what we have now. That's revolutionary. That's so antithetical to what it used to be in China. To a certain extent, obviously people try to have fun, but this generation gets to decide what is fun, what is leisure. Like I said before, 2/3 of all people who have passports in China are under the age of 37. They're millennials. They're seeing the world. And so it's not just pressure, the way that this pressure articulates often is consumption. This is they're deeply interconnected. They want to see stuff. They want to spend. They want to eat incredible food. They want to see the world. And by the way, those are also dreams that are inherited from their parents who could not.
Who could not do that? Right. Their cheers was bury some of this drink under the mattress in case we need it later.
I mean, yes. Ugh, dark.
Yeah, I know, right? I know it's a joke, but it's also kind of not. Like
it's, we make light of the past because it makes it easier to swallow. And, and that is, one of the things that we so often forget is how poor China was recently. These are numbers that get the Chinese government listed 600 million people, 700 million people out of poverty. And it's true to a certain extent, people left poverty. but we have this idea that the Chinese government lifted them out of poverty. I have friends, parents, and grandparents who would take major exception to that
Yeah.
because they were the ones working in the factories.
Yeah.
They were the ones who, after a 60-hour week at the Nike factory, were asking for an extra 20 hours because it was the first time in modern Chinese history where you could work harder and longer and actually earn more money.
Right.
Change the fate of your family. And it's the incredible hard work of this older generation that has allowed this younger generation to be a little bit more indulgent.
Yeah.
To be a little bit more self-care oriented or fun oriented. It's pretty special.
It's funny to watch like Chinese friends of mine whose parents are like, work hard, work hard, work hard. And then when they come home all stressed, their parents are like, you need to relax. You know, your problem is you don't relax. You need to relax. And
Right,
it's like,
just
okay, make up your freaking mind.
Just chill out.
Yeah.
So I was in Chengdu recently, and I was visiting a really close friend of mine who is in the book. I'm not going to tell you who it is. And I know his parents really well because they live outside of Chengdu. I've been there for New Year's. So one of their specialties, and I am zeroing in on this, is a type of meat fat baijiu. You know what baijiu is?
It's like it's like a liquor.
It's a Chinese sorghum liquor, and so it directly translates to white wine.
But it's not wine.
It's so anyone here,
Yeah.
if anyone in China who kind of speaks okay English is like, would you like some white wine? Think twice.
Yeah.
Baijiu is white liquor, and it's typically between 56 and 62% alcohol. Sometimes you'll get down to 50, but it's strong. And so I've gotten like drunk with his entire family for like 5 or 6 days straight.
God,
I know them very well.
he's sore.
And I was back visiting them, and his mom was talking to me like, I'm just trying to help blank. I'm just trying to help him relax. I'm just trying to help him like enjoy life.
Yeah.
And, he needs to find a girlfriend and like enjoy stuff. And obviously the girlfriend thing is a little bit loaded. But I told her, I'm like, look, you don't just shake off that level of competition before.
Yeah.
Because the competition to get into a good high school, he went into a private high school. The competition to get into a good college. The competition to get into a good graduate work. The competition to get a good job. The competition on the professional market. And then the competition on the marriage market is so fierce in China for this young generation that the idea of taking your foot off the gas and just chilling is tough.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're not of means.
People here know that it's hard to get into college, but the idea that you would have to prepare for 13 straight years in order to have a fighting chance is alien, right? It's like, yeah, you take some AP classes in high school, you got to do some extracurricular activities. If you're a celebrity, you bribe someone to put you on the crew team,
Right,
whatever.
water polo team.
Right, yeah, the water polo team. But like in China, it's a completely different animal. And I remember hearing things and reading in your book, things like if you don't do well on this exam, like you're basically the fates have spoken. It's like if you don't do well on your SAT, you retake it.
Right.
If you don't do well on these exams here, your life is over as far as your parents are concerned. You can do stuff, I'm sure, you're just a failure in many people's eyes.
In China, the only thing that matters when you apply to college is your score. So here, you could, have Uncle Jimmy who runs General Electric. Probably not likely that.
Maybe
your
not
uncle
General Electric.
All right, not a good example, but
Yeah.
like who might be who might have some sort of status or stature, or you could get a great teacher to write you a wonderful thing. You could be, if you're the captain of the cheerleading squad, the water polo team, the debate team, that's really great. In China, that would be a waste of time.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't add up. That's not considered when you're being considered.
Right. It's like, why are you wasting your time having fun? You should have learned geometry
You
better.
should have been there. There's an interesting stat for this. So when you think about, it's easy to say, okay, people in China study hard. Fine. There's an interesting study about myopia. Myopia is nearsightedness. Nearsightedness is really is an interesting sort of way to compare people because it's literally just what you do every day. It's the result of a lot of your habits. So this was comparing Germany and China. South Korea was also involved. I believe the UK was also involved. But basically in Western countries, Germany and the United Kingdom, kids who got out of college, towards the end of their college career, they tested their eyesight. 40% of them tested for nearsightedness. 40%. Pretty high. In China, that number is 90%.
Because everyone's staring at a book all day.
The amount of time you're spending indoors, the amount of time you're spending in front of a computer, the amount of time you're spending studying, it's the composite of what you do every day. South Korea, by the way, is 96%. Crazy intense.
That's insane. That's insane.
I had a friend named Bella, who's chapter 2 of this book, and I actually got to speak at her wedding recently, which again, this is why I'm a bad journalist theoretically, is because at the end of this, I'm pretty tight with a lot of the people I write about, and you get to see them become adults. It's a really special time in anyone's life at this relatively tender pivot. And so Bella at the time was 22. She had just graduated college. She met at Suzhou University, in the Suzhou University Library. In Suzhou University Library, there's all these big tables, and people more or less camp there. So you take all your books, whatever you're studying, and you form a little fortress around your seat. And so you could tell what everyone's studying based on the bricks in their fortress. This guy's economics, this person's literature, this person's history, this person's philosophy, this person's machine learning, or things that I don't understand. You can get the gist. And I sit down. And I'm an idiot. I have no idea what I'm doing. I had just gotten there, and I sit down to study my Chinese that day, in an economics fortress, not
Right.
realizing that this belonged to somebody else.
Somebody who's been there every day.
Somebody's
for
been
9
there
months.
every single day. And within about 2 minutes, I hear someone laughing, and it's sort of when you can tell the direction of a laugh. Like this wasn't an internal laugh. This person to the left of me is doing something dumb. So I turn to my right, and I meet a woman who I later realized was called Bella. She's Chinese. Her name's not Bella, but English name is Bella, and she's laughing at my really bad characters, my Chinese characters. We start to talk. It turns out Bella had been there, coming there for around 2 months, every single day, getting there around 6:45 in the morning, 7 in the morning before it opened, and leaving around 10 o'clock at night, around when it closes. Over the next 7 months, I would see Bella in the morning, on the way to the library, getting her 15-cent buns as she prepared for an entire day of studying. I would see her at the end of the night as I'm eating shaokao, so barbecue on the side of the road, leaving the library because she just spent a full day studying there. She was studying to become a translator to pass one test at the end of the year.
So crazy.
The seasons pass. Bella in the morning is walking through these beautiful leaves that are falling in Suzhou as it turns into winter, fall or spring, however seasons work. Spring
winter
happens.
comes after that. Yeah,
Right,
spring.
winter comes after winter. And every single day, regardless of the weather, Bella is in there studying. She's in a dorm room with 5 other women. There's no bathroom in the dorm room. There's no heat in the dorm room because we're in a southern state within China, southern province. So there's no heat in southern provinces. It gets below freezing. Every single day she's going to this library. At the end of the year, when it's time for Bella to take the test, there are around 700 people who get into the program. There's 700 people who apply to this specific program. There's 4 people who pass. Bella was 6th.
4
Out
of 700.
of 700.
I don't even know if I'd have the guts to try with those odds.
Every single day of an entire year of your life. And Bella didn't pass.
That sucks.
And by the way, she's doing wonderfully now.
Yeah,
I asked her what's going on. She's like, I have to give up this dream. In China, and this goes back to this thing of constant change. It's not just change, it's change plus competition. She's like, look, I think that I'm an exceptional person. I think that I am special. And this road is closed off to me, so I'm just going to have to find something else.
That sucks.
Bella's in the startup scene right now in China and crushing it as a facilitator of startups and helping people understand how to work with government to get a lot of that incentivized funding from local government. So she's found her way. She's in a happy marriage. Her husband's wonderful, although he needs to lose a little bit of weight. She's been on about that recently. He's looking a little bit lazy recently. She actually had me lecture him about this recently, but that determination, I just don't see that in a lot of places outside of China.
Yeah. That I 4 spots out of 700. I wouldn't even try. That's less than 1%. I wouldn't even try doing it.
Those are what feel like the odds of success in China.
And that's translator. You're not applying to be a investment
No, this is
banker.
like Goldman Sachs position.
Right.
Which, by the way, I don't know the odds for that, but
I
in
don't.
China I can imagine they're absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I know plenty of people that went to work at Goldman from Michigan Law, and either I'm just blissfully ignorant of the odds that I was in around me, but I don't think so. I think that it's just sad. I mean, to become a translator, if you wanted to become a translator in the United States, you'd have to learn the language pretty well, but I don't think it's like, well, we only take 0.8% of the applicants.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
there's just no way.
This, by the way, is part of why entrepreneurialism is becoming so hot right now in China. Because if you're trying to go the traditional route, passing a test, getting into a either state-owned enterprise or a firm that's like, wow, you went to this school or that school, the odds are just brutally difficult. And not everyone's a good test taker.
Yeah, I feel that.
I was actually a good test taker. I closed my eyes and somehow got into a pretty good school. It's not as easy as that, but I recognize that this is one of the I was something about it, it made sense.
Yeah,
to me.
you don't freak out on tests.
I
There's a
was
whole lot
I
of-
was able to do it. I know a lot of friends who are not, and because of our, it's sort of counterbalanced in China that if you can't pass a test, you're not getting into a good school.
right.
Period.
They don't go, oh, you have ADD. Let's get you some extra time.
No chance. And
Yeah.
so right now you're starting to see this bubbling of entrepreneurial spirit within this young generation for two reasons. First of them is just this issue of test taking. You might not be good at a test, but that doesn't mean you're bad at business.
Right.
That doesn't mean you're bad at coding. That doesn't mean you're bad. And that intensity that people bring to test taking, they bring to starting your business. We make a joke about being like ramen sufficient here, where like, or whatever it is. Like, all right, you have enough money where you guys can eat.
Yeah.
In the United States, you have enough money where you can eat ramen. If you're eating ramen in China, you're balling. You're doing well.
Oh man.
Some Japanese noodles, you're living life well. There's this intensity that they bring to that startup culture. The second issue is average wage in China is still really low. We think of, okay, there's like some parity between China and the United States. The average income in Chengdu when I was living there, they do it by the month. It was about $600, $700 US per month. Imagine trying to buy an iPhone,
Oh yeah.
making around $607
point.
per month.
Good point. It's like 10% of your salary for the whole year.
And so the way to get off of that wage track is to create a business, is to start something different, is to sell something internationally with people who could afford a little bit more. It's an exciting moment right now in China because of this really substantial entrepreneurial surge.
That's bonkers, man. My God. Let's get into language stuff, though, man. We could talk for hours, but I want to get into the language stuff because the CIA ranks Mandarin as, I think, the hardest language to learn in the world. Is that correct?
Among the hardest languages.
For English speakers,
it's
by
the
the
top
way.
tier in terms. Yeah, that's an important
point. It's
point.
like Hindi. Is Hindi, I think, is one of them, too.
So Arabic, I believe Hindi is one of them. I'm not totally positive. I know Arabic, and I haven't checked this recently because I haven't had to flex as much recently.
Yeah.
But it's, this is something you used to say to impress your parents' friends.
Right.
Arabic, Japanese, I believe South Korean, and then Chinese. I would argue that Chinese is certainly more difficult than South Korean. Sorry, my friends in
You mean
South
just
Korea.
Korean in general? I mean, it's...
Oh, excuse me, Korean. Yeah, I apologize.
They do have Korean in
It
North
is true.
Korea,
It is
too.
true. No, I apologize. And although I hear that the actual
little
like
different.
language, it's like Taiwanese
Yeah.
Mandarin versus
I guess, yeah.
I'm just trying to cover up for my
I'll let it slide.
stupidity there. I appreciate it. Anyways, it's hard, and the reason it's hard is because there's no alphabet, and this is where Korean is different.
Right.
So if the English alphabet has 26 letters, and if you know the alphabet, you could read any word off the page.
Even if you don't know what it means, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, and the letters have no meaning. D doesn't mean anything, but you put it with A and another D, and it spells out dad. You're like, oh, okay, that's dad. Our alphabet is used to describe our oral language in that way. Chinese has tens of thousands of unique characters. And if you don't recognize one character, you can't read it off the page.
I know.
It's
the worst.
It's a really difficult part. And that's just the written side. The spoken side, it's a tonal language. And people are like, oh, English is a tonal language? Like, is it maybe? And not the same.
Not really. No.
In Chinese...
There was one, in fact, I thought of an example earlier when you were talking. You said the new generation doesn't want to 吃苦, which is like eat bitter or suffer. But if you say 吃苦, it's parking space or garage.
Right, exactly.
So, and trust me, you might have heard the difference there. When you're learning every word in Chinese, it's going to take you a long-ass time to hear the difference. And then also to remember that 吃苦 is suffer and 吃苦 is parking space or garage. Like, you have to know how to say that. And when you hear it, you have to go, oh, parking space. Yes, some of it's context. Some of it is just not going to, some of it's going to trip you up forever.
And this is if we're speaking really slow, right? Like, 吃苦 versus 吃苦. Sure, maybe you can figure it out.
Yeah.
But if someone's yelling at you to stop eating bitter and find your stupid parking space, like, you're like, ooh,
right.
It freaks you out. And
and then you got to remember when you want to say it yourself.
Right, exactly.
Which
you got to hit, I used to complain because I'm like, look, I'm getting the phonemes right. I'm not getting the tones right. You guys know what I'm saying. But now when people speak trash Chinese, that's typically non-tonal. I have no idea.
Sure.
Once you train your ear enough, and we can get into how to do that. But just to give you a basic example, this is the famous example. Ma, 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 ma. Ma means mother. Ma means hemp. Ma means horse. Ma means scold. You don't want to confuse horse and mother. Ha, ha, ha. This is like the classic Chinese joke. There's some naughtier ones.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can get into this.
Yeah, if you want to. Yeah.
Just
yeah, that's fine.
This is young China. We're trying to be cool and cutting edge.
No, it's fine.
So a funny story of mine. I have a friend who does not speak very good Chinese. Is a foreign friend, and we were in Harbin, which is as far north as you can go in China. We were there during winter. It was negative 30 degrees, sort of like you spit on the sidewalk, it cracks.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
It's one of
to
the
see that.
coldest cities in China / isn't it one of the coldest cities in the world?
It's one of the coldest habitable places in the world.
Yeah, that's what I thought. They have an ice festival
adjacent
where
to Siberia.
They like build buildings and lanterns and all this stuff out of ice.
So
and then
we
you
were
can build it.
there for this ice festival.
I heard it's incredible.
It's incredible. They build this entire city and these massive sculptures, like multi-story high, just of ice, and they sort of pipe these colored lights into them. It really is incredible. I'm a Californian. My friend was Costa Rican. The only people who are dumb enough to go to Harbin in the middle of winter are, us.
Right.
But regardless, it's
like
cold.
-40. That's just a number to me.
That's an abstract. I have no concept of what that means. By the way, the first thing to happen is your nose hairs freeze. We took a 31-hour train ride. And as soon as we get off the train, everyone local is wearing like loafers. I'm like, this will be easy. And the first thing that happened to me is I completely panic.
You start coughing.
You start coughing. I feel my nose hairs freeze over, and my first impulse, my friend had to stop me from running back on the train.
Yeah.
I blacked out. You like white out. I had no idea that that's what I was doing. So
yeah, that's what it's like going back to Michigan. You walk out of DTW Airport, you start coughing because you go, oh, I forgot. You got to breathe slower.
Exactly. And so my friend goes in. He wants to buy a face mask because it keeps your face warm and it also blocks off pollution.
Yeah.
And he's asking for what he should be saying is jiao. Face cover. Ko is mouth and jiao is cover. And he's like motioning to his mouth. He's like, ko jiao. Or that's what he should have been doing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what he was saying was ko jiao, which means oral exchange.
Oh, yeah.
Oral exchange. And I know that's the PG version of it, but like this guy behind the counter was like freaking out. Because it's not like he immediately, he means face cover.
Right.
Because it's not intuitive. If you like, he's like, this is my language and you're butcher.
Yeah.
If someone says oral sex versus face cover, you're not going to be like, oh, when you say oral sex, you really mean face cover.
Yeah.
So this is what this guy's hearing and just absolutely freaked out. Tones matter. and getting it right matters. And you don't want to walk into a convenience store thinking you're asking for a face mask and really be asking for a sexual favor.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I started learning Mandarin because it was hard. I was like, well, I'm learning Korean, and then if it's going to be this similar amount of effort, I'm just going to start learning Mandarin. And it's tough. But of course, if you can learn languages, you can learn anything. It's great for going to a country. If you're going to be there for a year or even 6 months, you should try to learn the language of the place where you're going. Obviously, if you're going to be there for any amount of time, learn some of the words, but it's worth getting conversational if you're going to be there 6 months to a year. It's worth getting fluent if you're going to be anywhere longer than 6 months or a year, I would say, as well. And I know that you had a pretty steep learning curve. Like, you really went at it with a vengeance.
I was very intense. And the reason is, and I, there's obviously, anytime that you're trying, I didn't know that I was going to stay in China for 4, 5, 6, 7, however long it's been 7 years now since I moved there, and 9 years since I first went. I didn't think that this was going to happen. But when I first went, for me, it felt like language was the first difficult thing I was ever taking on my own. And so it had enormous personal meaning for me. And so figuring out how to do it, I said earlier that I spoke French at the time. I didn't speak a word of French. I took 2 years of French, didn't learn anything. I'm not a language learner, or that's what I was told.
Yeah.
And so I did an enormous amount of research into the fastest ways to go about language acquisition, not language learning as we talk about, but language acquisition. The idea being that you could just acquire it over time if you do the right things. And that was really empowering for me. So there's a couple things that you could do that will allow you to learn language faster than all of your friends and faster than what everyone says that is possible. I'm not going to share those. You guys have to, $9.99 per month. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
It's before I say this, I will say that the greatest gift I've ever given myself as someone who grew up in California, didn't speak another language in the household, is learning Chinese. And it's not because it's obvious, I obviously use it for my work and I've made sort of a life out of it. But the amount of homes I've been invited into, the amount of friendships I've developed, and then just the way that my own thinking has evolved. It's like I've built an entirely different room or world in my brain. I didn't diminish the space of the first one. I just sort of knocked out one of the walls, and now I can kind of float between the two. It's just as like a personal gift in terms of how it It makes your thought process and your worldview a little bit more richer. I'm just such a big advocate of
I'm
like
with you, man. I've gone off on this on the show many a time. Just not even just with Chinese, but any language. You have these little moments where you just go, "Oh, I wouldn't have figured that out if I didn't know this language." Even just little tiny. The other day, I forgot how to say umbrella in Spanish, and I was like, "Oh yeah, paraguas," and I was like, "Oh." Parasol. Oh, that's for sun, that's for rain. And then I was
Ah.
like, language
Yeah,
thing.
right,
But I
exactly.
was like, oh, okay. I love those little moments. And with Chinese, there's so many little things like that. And then there's not that this isn't necessarily worth the work, but there's something that happens when I walk into a Chinese restaurant and order in Chinese where I just go, damn right. And they're always like,
Yeah,
whoa, like they freak out and like
100%.
never gets old.
100%.
One of your strategies that I thought was really good was you didn't go you didn't do what a lot of people do. You didn't go to Shanghai and Beijing and go, I live in China. You're like, I need to go to what was it, second or third tier city?
Second or third. So I was in Suzhou at the time, and
Yeah.
it's become a suburb of Shanghai even. And so after I realized that, I left. I The hardest part of being in China now, everyone's like, oh, you go into China, you learn by immersion, is that most people don't immerse themselves in
Right,
China.
right.
In Shanghai, most of the people, and I'm not knocking this, by the way, I've been an expat before, it's fun. I did it when I was studying abroad, it's a good time. But most people only have foreign friends. And the Chinese friends they do have all speak perfect English. And so even if you're spending 30 minutes a day or 3 hours a day in your Chinese class, if at the end of the day you're going to hang out with your expat friends, I have never met anyone who has learned Chinese that way, ever.
Yeah.
I've met some people who get pretty good and can order beers and can have some stilted conversations. But my definition of fluency is if my friend, and by the way, I have to have a Chinese friend for this, even to be possible, but ideally a lot of them. If I'm thinking of a friend Yedza, who ran a hostel on the fourth ring road or just outside of the third ring road.
His name is Leaf.
Her name is Leaf.
Oh, okay.
Xiao Yedza, Little Leaf, and by the way, Yedza is also weed for anyone trying to pick up in China. Don't.
Yeah, not worth it.
Yeah, don't. But regardless, in Chengdu, and she had a breakup, and so she called me crying and describing to me the emotional pain. Can you comfort somebody when they're breaking up with you in their language? Could you first? Are they calling you? Second, can you comfort them? And third, can you be empathetic? On the next day, if things kicked off in North Korea, could I have a conversation about nuclear deterrence?
Yeah, that's
Like
tough.
this is what I had in my head. I'm like, all right, if I can get there, which is a bit lofty.
That is lofty.
But it was this is where I want to be because these are the things that matter. The politics matters, but also the personal relationships really matter. So the first thing that you want to do is avoid expat communities if you can.
Yeah, don't go to the Irish pub with your British friends every day.
Do it every now and then, but if you make a life of that, you just won't learn the language. So the overarching theme, and this is from a guy named Katsumoto who runs a language blog called AJAT, all Japanese all the time. He's a bit of a nut. He writes like a nut. I have my hands in the air because I'm expressing how nutty he is. But the language principles he described is pretty much what everyone describes. He's just more intense about it. So his big overriding quote is that you don't learn a language, you get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I interpreted that and the way I used that was I thought about shifting my mental diet into Chinese. So if we are what we eat, we know intuitively that if we eat good food, we'll become a fitter person. If we eat bad food, we start to look that way a little bit. Our brain composition, and this isn't obviously particularly scientific, but in terms of the way that we think, we are what we eat. So my mental diet means the conversations I had is obvious. The podcast I listen to, sorry, Jordan, you might lose a couple listeners because of this. I apologize. Okay. The movies I watched, the TV I watched, the friends I surrounded myself with, the roommates I had, the very bad, awkward dates I went on, all should be in Chinese, top to bottom. A lot of people say, well, I don't understand the TV. Good.
Yeah.
You want to feel like you need it. The amount of subconscious churn, especially at the beginning, that's necessary to make your brain kick it into gear and be like, I need to figure this out. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to live in this world that I'm inhabiting right now. This is how kids learn it. This is how kids learn it. Their parents are talking, the TV is on, and they're just trying to decode the world around them. So if your entire world is in a code that you don't understand, your brain is going to do a lot of the work for you to decode that and allow you to understand that language far faster than what most people do, which is, at 8:30 in the morning, you go to your language immersion class. You're there for 5 hours. Next to you is a Korean student. Behind you is an Irish student. To the left of you is a South African student. You're hearing them speak crap Chinese all day.
Right.
At 3 o'clock, you get out of class and you go get beers with them, and you start speaking English again. The maybe the worst, and I don't think this is absolutely true, but certainly the highest concentration of bad Chinese speakers in a Chinese city is in a Chinese language class.
Yeah, good point. And yet that's our first stop when we want to learn the language.
So there's ways to do it without it. And there's a few things that I think are really important. First, if you're taking, you need a foundation. And so this is where class matters. I think of it as a filing system, a mental filing system. You have to understand the basic grammatical rules. You have to kind of understand the way a sentence works in order for you to start to label and sort the information that you'll be acquiring over the next couple of years of language acquisition. So either take one of these classes for 2 months, or do one-on-one classes. Take that same money, have fewer hours, but take some one-on-one classes.
That's what I do. I take Skype lessons. People have heard this. I'm happy to refer anyone. My teachers are 24/7. They're in China. I'm the only one in the class. I think it rounds out to about $17 an hour. And you can, super flexible, obviously. And they go, "What do you want to learn?" And I go, "Here's what I'm going to be doing. I don't want to learn how to write because I don't even write things by hand in English. If I can read, I can type in pinyin and the character will pop up and I can read it, so I can push that one. Like I save myself, 50% of time learning that kind of thing. And you end up with all of these different techniques. I use SRS, which is I think called spaced
repetition system. So this is what you're skipping ahead, Jordan.
Yeah.
But that's a really good point about the Skype thing, because you don't have to be in the room anymore.
No.
And it's inexpensive. And you're also funding the people who don't have the opportunity to study abroad themselves or to go abroad themselves. So that to me is like a perfect example of, okay, these are people who are interested in the outside world who don't get to travel there. They're looking for some money and they're professionals, by the way.
Yeah, they're real teachers.
They're
it's not
really
like some
good
dude
teachers.
At home who
it's a massive system. The amount of young people who go to college for teaching foreigners Chinese is massive. So they're qualified, and it's become a really beautiful interaction and friendship. So number one is build a filing cabinet. Filing cabinet is your basic organization system that you're going to be putting these Chinese words into, Chinese words and Chinese phrases. The second part is hours in the pool. And this is sort of what I said before. I'm writing this down as I go because I have not codified this as well as I'd like to. But hours in the pool. We study Chinese, or we study anything, for 30 minutes at a time. We put our pencil down, we wipe our forehead, we feel good about ourselves. Language, again, you don't learn a language, you get used to it. Mm-hmm. So you have to think about, how do I get more hours in the pool? The best way to do it, in fact, if I recommend one thing to any aspiring language learner, particularly Chinese, is to watch hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of TV. Which is
good permission slip. Usually you're not supposed to be watching TV.
This is what I'm saying. So I used to be like, TV is bad, I don't watch TV, but people have to chill. And what Katz talks about from All Japanese All the Time is take whatever your hobby is and do it in that source language. So whether it's manga, whether it's video games, whatever. TV is so good because it's the closest you can get to immersion.
Manga, isn't it? It's not manga.
I don't know, man. This is. I'm exposing myself.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I
think it is. I think it is manga. I'm sorry. I actually, if you get
manga, I thought that was like eating in Italian.
Well, I'm clearly not as worldly as I'm letting on here. I've been stuck in Asia for a while. Right. Although I should definitely know manga then. Regardless, it's
I like the idea of doing a hobby in that language. That's cool.
How do you spend more time doing that thing than you would otherwise?
Right.
Because if you're just studying in front of a book, you got a half an hour,
you get
2 hours. If you're heroic, you have 2 hours. But TV, how often? What's the last show you were binge watching?
Sure, yeah. Lay there and watch music videos in Chinese for 4 hours.
It's not only studying; it's the best kind of study because you have visual cues. You have, obviously, auditory cues. You also have context. If the way that you use a word is funny, is playful. And then you have all these mnemonic devices which allow you to recall, okay, this word was said in this context. It's the closest you get to actually living the experience as possible. So the sort of memory casing is so much richer than if you were just to learn it off the page in a textbook. So hours in the pool is number 2.
What's the third?
There's
got to be a third.
The third one is SRS.
Oh, the space repetition.
And this is where it gets a little bit structured. So, by the way, technology makes all of these possible. Mm-hmm. It used to be people were like, if you're not in France, you can't learn French, or you can't really learn French. That's still true. The reason I'm giving a huge shout out here, but you know what? Katsumoto really did change my life.
We'll
It's
link
not-
to that in the show notes.
Yeah, honestly, he's the boss. He moved to a payment system like very early on, and I didn't fund it, so this is my way of giving back to you. But the he was in like Minnesota when he learned fluent Japanese.
Crazy.
So he's not there. He's like living out of his dorm room. The SRS system is where it gets a little bit more structure. So an SRS system is how you could learn anything. Spaced repetition system. Everyone knows that it's important to do flashcards when you're learning a language. But what happens when you have more than 100?
Yeah, you see one every month.
You're right, exactly. It's like it's on this stack on your desk, and you don't have a system for showing you the right information at the right time. So an SRS system is a system on your phone or your computer where you input the cards you basically build the cards the exact same way. And it does the thinking for you in terms of when you need it.
Right. I have this for Skritter for Chinese. There's also Anki, which we'll link to.
Anki's for anything. Anki's open source, so you can if I was taking any test in the world, from a driving test to a cooking test to some technical test, I would use Anki and an SRS system to learn it. It's so much more efficient.
It shows you either the picture or the symbol or the word. If you say it in your head or out loud, if you know it, you give it a plus or whatever. If you don't know it, you give it a minus, and it shows you the ones that you've said you don't know more often than the ones you've said you do.
Exactly.
Which is just logical, but with it if you try to do that manually, it's a humongous freaking pain.
Enormous. So this does all the thinking for you. This does all the scheduling for you. So basically, you have to make a rule to yourself that every day I'm doing 20 minutes of flashcards or 15 minutes of flashcards or 30 minutes of flashcards. And you sit down and your SRS system does the thinking for you in terms of which flashcards you need to see. You just sit there and do it. And I've been doing it almost every day. I've had lapses, but almost every day for 7 years now. And the goal is 10,000 flashcards. By the way, one of the major tenets of flashcard building, sentences. Don't input individual words.
This is smart.
It's super important.
Yeah.
And the reason is, Americans, we don't learn grammar. We internalize it because we read enough and you see enough examples where you it's called Yugan. It's called language feel. That language feel you develop through sentences. So you're reading a book or you're watching TV and someone says a sentence that you like, that you might want for later.
Yeah, I store it in my head.
You put it in your SRS, it comes up later, and for I now can go through, I now know what funny book I was reading or what show I was watching for the last 7 years based on which sentences I put into my SRS system. I've got about 5,000 now.
Yeah.
I'm not stopping till I get to 10.
There were points in my German learning, for example, where I would say an entire sentence or entire paragraph that was just individual sentences that I'd memorized. And people were like, wow, you're so good at this. And I'm like, actually, I just memorized 4 sentences. But after a while, then you can obviously create your own. You just follow the structure that's in these other sentences. And it sounds like a native person would have put that sentence together.
Exactly.
But if you're just memorizing words, you're just trying to plug them in, and it's kind of like you're trying to fit the Lego on the Duplo, and it's not working.
Super stiff. And so all of this is really trying to, from the filing cabinet, which is just your basic structure, to the hours in the pool, which is just getting a feeling for the way the language works, to the SRS system, which is just prodding your brain, reminding your brain, and it's the most efficient way to feed your brain new information and then retain it. If you combine those three and you create a daily practice, where on the way over here, I actually was listening to your show, so this is a good example.
Great.
But when I'm on the
use of time,
wow, everyone should do that.
Yeah.
Whenever
you're onto
got some
something.
time in the car. Anyways, the TV I watch on airplanes. I fly a lot. When I had a full-time job, when I was finishing up the book in New York, the last 7 months of that, 45 minutes in from Brooklyn to New York, I was working at the Chrysler Building in a suit and tie gig. We can talk about that later. I was the terrible person on the subway, crammed with other people watching my iPad and laughing because I was watching Chinese TV. 45 minutes on the way back, I would SRS during the lunch break. And you create these habits that allow you to learn a language. They're faster and better than thinking you have to be in a classroom or you have to be at your desk 30 minutes a day in order for it to work.
One of the things that I hear a lot is, what should I do? I'm 25 or I'm 32. I'm going through this transition. What should I learn? What should I do? And if I had the next X number of months or years off, quote unquote, not necessarily off, but to try to make a shift,
right?
My suggestion is go abroad, because you really can't do that as you get older. It gets exponentially harder. And if you're going to go abroad and you have no significant other, you have no kids, you don't have some cat you got to feed every day, go to China and go to a second or third tier city like you suggested during the show in China, because that's when you can live in a youth hostel or teach English in some random area and become worst case scenario, you become fluent in Mandarin Chinese after 8, 12, 15, 18 months. And then you come back and you apply for a job. And yeah, you don't have a ton of experience in automotive engineering, but you speak fluent frickin' Mandarin, which is like now you're in a top percentile of go-getters. But where do people begin doing that? Like, what are some of the advantages of people doing this, and where can they do this? I think a lot of times people think, I'm not a teacher, I can't do this. I have a feeling going to China is still one of those places, still one of those things you can do. And they go, hey, you're a native speaker? Come on in.
Without a doubt. And it's a moment right now, and it might change over the next 10 years. And it's even shifting a little bit now, but it's a moment right now where if you have an American passport, this is kind of messed up, by the way. There's some great English speakers from all around the world who aren't native speakers necessarily. But if you have an American passport, a South African passport, an Australian passport, a British, a passport from the UK, you can get a job in China, period. Regardless of your education, high or not, regardless of whatever, you can go to China and find an English-speaking job. You can get one beforehand. And there's a variety. I mean, literally, you can Google English-teaching jobs in China. And the amount of structure there is now around those systems that allow you to go there, it's a booming business. It's an enormous business. And so we can send over some sites where if you want to
start. I would love that. Yeah, we'll throw those in the comments.
I went through the ringer. For me, a big part of going to China was getting off any system whatsoever. Getting off the track. When you go to one of these sort of schools where they're, I went to Columbia. Everyone at Columbia is an artist until senior year.
Yeah.
And so I found myself in like consulting and like banking interviews. I'm like, well, what's going on?
Right.
So I wanted to just get away from all of that. But there are these programs like there's Fulbright. There's Peace Corps, which gives you a really robust language base. There's Princeton in Asia. There's a bunch of these where, you could kind of go high or low. I went with nothing. I went with a backpack. I got a job in 3 days.
That's amazing.
I left the job 3 days, but
and then I kept it for 72 hours.
High velocity of job growth, but the opportunities are definitely out there. By the way, I would guess there's about 5% of foreigners in China who speak fluent Chinese. Only 5.
Interesting.
It's really disappointing.
I believe that. When I was in Germany, I met people that were there for like 4 years, and they're like, "Yeah, I speak German," and I was like, "Your German sucks." And I've been here for 7 months, and you've been here for 7 years, and you can't understand me. Like, that's pathetic.
That was actually one of the horrifying things. So we talk about language before, and by the way, if you are going to China and you do want to learn Mandarin fast, choose some language heroes. You want to surround yourself with the people who can do it. So find 1 or 2 people who can crush it. Someone from me was Bill Bishop. He's one of the great sinologists of our time. He's a news guy. He's known as the China Hand, as well as a guitar player in Suzhou named Jackson, who spoke the coldest Chinese of anyone I'd ever met. I'm like, all right, if Jackson can do it and Bill can do it, I can do it too.
Zach, we just did a really long podcast about China, young China, business in China, learning Chinese and other languages and immersion. But I wanted to find out what is maybe like the weirdest or most unusual thing. Because when you watch Wild China, or you watch these videos, or you watch like Lao Wai, I don't know if you know who that is, that vlogger.
Yeah.
He's always doing weird stuff. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I bet Zach's done some weird stuff as well.
For better or worse.
Yeah.
I've done a good amount of weird stuff. The scary part is when the weird stuff starts seeming weird.
Yeah.
But early on, we talked about Harbin before. Harbin is one of the northernmost province in China. They have this ice festival. They also have a Siberian tiger preserve. And there was one time, without getting too deep into the story here, where this old lady on the sort of skywalk over the tiger preserve had a sign where she was selling different types of animals. And I'm like, that's a little weird.
Yeah.
Goat, chicken, cow, and like cow is like, it was like $300 US, which in China
for a whole cow.
I just saw a menu, and so I'm thinking that's a ridiculous price for beef. It turns out though that you could actually buy these animals and feed them to the Siberian tigers.
So she just has a cow out back somewhere, and you can buy it.
So me and the couple of Chinese kids I was traveling with, and 1 or 2 foreigners who I was traveling with, we pool our cash and buy a live chicken, and I was elected to be the person who ends up basically fishing for Siberian tigers.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? So we're on the skywalk. This sort of older Chinese woman, kind of grizzled by the cold weather, and she straps a live chicken to the end of this bamboo pole. And I'm thinking, well, I grew up in Berkeley, by the way, so like variety of trigger warnings going off here.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And so She's basically teaching me how to evade the tiger. These things can jump like 17 feet. And
Yeah,
so
weren't you worried that it's like, I'm gonna pull that big juicy dude in here and eat him too?
Siberian tiger pinata. It within about 3. I tried to not be too good at the game,
Yeah.
so to put the chicken out of its misery. But
Yeah.
like snowing in the middle of Harbin, these white tigers,
Yeah.
and then this red chicken blood
Gross.
streaking across after they get the pinata.
I'm wondering, if you buy the cow, how do they get the cow down there?
It has certainly occurred to me.
Like, hey, you got to walk it in here, but I highly recommend jumping back over the fence once you do.
I'll tell you what, Jordan. I can send you the address if you want to find out for yourself. That's a little bit above my pay grade and my digestion
I can't
capabilities.
Do it. Yeah.
But hey, if you want to know what it looks like for Siberian tigers to rip apart some live animals, there's a spot in Harbin that'll let you do
That
it.
is gnarly.
Yeah.
That is, yeah. No, I'll pass on that. I'll just take your word for it. Great story. Zach, thank you so much. And if you want to learn a little bit more about learning Chinese, check out the podcast episode that Zach and I did at jordanharbinger.com. And we'll also throw those resources for going to China, getting jobs in the show notes for our podcast episode, also at jordanharbinger.com in the show notes.
Absolutely doable. Be bold. Go out and do it. You'll love it.
Thank you.